Best known of Egypt's few women pharaohs, he has received the benediction of the seated Amun-Ra and the lion-headed goddess Sekhmet in this carved 15th century BC relief from the temple of Karnak in Thebes. Other goddesses, initially associated with the funerary rites, an ancient archer goddess of the Delta, was symbolized by a shield and crossed arrows. She was identified with Athena by the Greek and with Diana by the Romans, a fearsome but righteous deity. She was a wise mediator, often described as a divine mother figure, and sometimes regarded as the mother of Sobek, Isis, Ra, and even Apophis. In one myth, she is credited as the first being to appear on the primeval dawn. At times, she could even intercede with the Ennead, and she played a judicial part in the epic battles between Horus and Seth. Satis, a goddess associated with the island of Elephantine, guarded the southern frontiers of Egypt, but her protective role was not exclusively martial. With her cult center situated at the point where the annual inundation first becomes apparent, she was given a share of the credit for this event, and because of her association with the Nile's sacred waters, she was seen too as a purifier of the dead. Over the centuries, the native Egyptian goddesses were joined by foreign deities during the rule of the Hyksos, immigrants whose name simply means rulers of foreign lands, who appear to have entered Egypt peacefully during the 18th to 16th century BC from the area of Palestine. 3 striking deities were added to the pantheon: the 2 martial goddesses Anat and Astarte, and a goddess of love, Khurshud. Egypt's goddesses enjoyed a popular appeal which the gods, for all their pomp and importance, never quite achieved. Indeed, when the closure of all the temples had been ordered by the Roman Emperor Theodosius in 384 AD, one continued to function, the Temple of Isis, at the city of Philae, near Aswan, on the Egypt-Nubia border, until around 535 AD. This remained the center for a cult of Isis which had been powerful enough to challenge early Christianity for religious supremacy. The conflicts of Horus and Seth. The story of Horus is set at the beginning of Egypt's long history. When the sun god Ra relinquished his rule on earth, he left as his successor his son Shu, who was succeeded by his son Geb, and in turn by his son Osiris. Following his marriage to his sister Isis, Osiris taught humankind the arts of agriculture and civilization, and proved a wise and just ruler. He brought abundance and prosperity to the land, and Egypt flourished. The golden age was all too brief, for there was terrible jealousy within the god's own family. Osiris's younger brother, Seth, burned with envy and ruthlessly plotted against him. And here's a statuette, a late period bronze of the jackal-headed Anubis. The god embalmed the dismembered body of Osiris, for which service he became patron of mummifiers. Osiris, so full of goodness, found it impossible to seek evil in others, and made no effort to protect himself from Seth's malice. Stories of how Seth murdered him differ. According to Plutarch's widely told version, Seth sealed Osiris in a chest and threw it into the Nile. According to another account, he turned himself into a raging bull and trampled Osiris into the dust. In any event, Seth was not satisfied with a simple killing. Still consumed with jealous rage, he hacked the body to bits and scattered the pieces throughout the land. So it was that the soul of his brother left the world of the living and crossed into the darkness. Of the underworld. He was the first living thing to die, and as such it was only fitting that in his afterlife he should command the land of the dead, the kingdom of the beautiful West. Seth, safe in the knowledge that Osiris had left behind no son to avenge him, settled down to enjoy the kingdom he had usurped. Isis, sister wife to Osiris, was wild with grief, but she was also enterprising and resourceful. Using all her skills in divination and magic, she scoured the land of Egypt with the help of her sister Nephthys until she had pieced together her husband's body. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Nephthys was married to Seth, who is also her brother. We'll find out here later. In later times, cult temples all over the land marked sites where dismembered parts of the murdered god were found. Isis then sought out the jackal god Anubis. He was generally regarded as the son of Nephthys, the fourth of the children of Geb and Nut. Some claim that his father was Osiris. Whatever his ancestry, Anubis sought to help Osiris by embalming the remains, the first time that such a feat had been accomplished. Anubis, as the inventor of mummification, came to be regarded as a god of great service to the dead. Isis, using her own magic as well as the skills of Anubis, was able to resurrect her dead husband for just the amount of time needed to impregnate herself with his seed. She then sought refuge at Chemis in the Nile Delta, where she gave birth to Horus, far from the reach of his jealous uncle. While the boy was an infant, he was cared for by Isis herself and by the cow goddess Hathor, who served as his wet nurse. As soon as he was old enough, Isis brought her child before the council of the assembled gods to demand the return of his birthright, the throne of Osiris. The meeting was long and stormy. Ra himself was unwilling to allow the lordship of the earth to pass from mighty Seth to a mere boy. But most of the other gods were impressed by the evident justice of Horus's case, as Shu, god of air, and the eldest son of the creator put it. Justice should triumph. We should give Horus his throne. The scribe god, Thoth, declared his agreement. That is 1,000,000 times right. Ra was not convinced by the decision, and it was more than somewhat disgruntled that any other god should dare to oppose his will. Isis was also proving a very able advocate. At one point in the wrangling, Seth became so angry with Isis's cunning pleas that he threatened to kill a god for each day that Isis remained at the divine court. "Let us cross over to the island in the middle of the river," said the sun god, "and tell the ferryman to deny passage to Isis, or any who may resemble her." Nemti, the divine ferryman, duly rowed all but Isis to the island, and returned to the mainland, where he waited while the gods enjoyed a meal during a break from their disputations. After a time, Isis appeared on the bank, disguised as an old crone. "Ferry me across," she begged. "I am taking food to the coward who has been working on the island for the last 5 days. At first, Nemti refused, even though he had no suspicion that he was talking to Isis. But the bribe of a golden ring soon changed his mind, and Isis entered the camp of the gods. Once again, she changed her shape, this time taking on the appearance of a beautiful young woman dressed in widow's weeds. Seth, always awake, at once approached her. "Why are you here, and who are you?" he asked in a bantering tone. "Oh, great Lord," answered Isis, "I come to seek justice, for I was the wife of a coward, and bore his son. Then, when my husband died, the boy went to take over his father's herd, but a stranger came and seized our cattle for himself. When my young son protested, the stranger threatened him with a beating. Please help me restore my son's inheritance." Seth waxed indignant. "How can a stranger seize the cattle while the son is still alive?" Isis had got what she wanted. Turning herself into a kite, she flew to a nearby tree and cackled with laughter at Seth's hypocrisy. "Oh, Seth, you have judged yourself." This time, the other gods, including Ra, agreed. Together, they prepared to crown Horus as rightful lord of the earth. Seth, though, was far from willing to accept the verdict. He may have lost his crown, but he was still unbeaten. And to prove it, he challenged Horus to the first of a series of combats. With Ra's approval, the two gods transformed themselves into hippopotamuses and fought in the waters of the Nile. "He who survives 3 months," declared Seth, "shall be given the throne." So the battle commenced, but once more Isis intervened, though this time to little effect. She quickly contrived a magic harpoon from a piece of copper and some yarn and hurled it at Seth. But the churning water where the beast gods were struggling confused her aim, and her first throw struck Horus. Instantly she used her magic to retrieve the weapon and threw it once again. This time the barb penetrated Seth, who rose to the surface with a cry of pain. "Oh, sister," he wailed, "why are you always my enemy? I am your brother. Let me go." Isis could not resist her brother's plea, and at once removed her harpoon. This was more than Horus could bear. He burst from the water in so great a rage at his mother's change of heart that he cut off her head with one stroke of his copper knife. He took hold of the head, then marched to the mountains. But Isis was, after all, the mistress of magic, and so unperturbed, she turned her body into a flint statue and walked over to join the watching assembly of the gods. When Ra was told exactly what had happened, he was beside himself with anger at Horus. While Isis restored herself to normal form, the gods scoured the earth for the miscreant. It was Seth who found him, sound asleep, in the shade of a shinusha tree in an oasis in the western desert. Seth at once leaped upon his nephew and tore out both of his eyes, leaving Horus to his terrible pain. Seth buried the eyes in the desert, where they took root and grew into 2 fine lotus flowers. Then Seth returned to Ra and denied he had ever seen Horus. One by one, the other gods abandoned the search. Only the goddess Hathor, who had wet-nursed the baby Horus, refused to give up. And it was she who found the eyeless god the next morning. With milk taken from a passing gazelle, she anointed the bleeding sockets and restored Horus's sight. Then she took him with her to the assembled gods and told them about Seth's appalling deeds. But this time Horus had also put himself in the wrong. He had attacked Isis with extreme violence, and even though his mother had forgiven his irrational action, Ra refused to show favor. He ordered a truce between Horus and Seth. Here's another relief. Lotus flowers blossomed across the walls of the temple of Seti I at Abydos, just as they burst forth from the torn-out eyes of Horus after Seth had buried them in the desert. Shortly afterwards, Horus's injuries were miraculously healed. The lotus was regarded as a symbol of rebirth. And then there's this other image. When Seth came to his garden to pick lettuces, his favorite vegetable, he was impregnated by the semen of his nephew Horus, sprinkled there by Isis. How bizarre. And here's another one. In the prow of Ra's solar bark, Seth leans forward to spear the dangerous serpent Apophis. Despite Seth's evil reputation, his enormous strength was greatly valued by Ra, who relied on his protection each night as he passed through the Duat from the Hirwebin's Book of the Dead, 21st Dynasty. Here's the first inset. The goddess Hathor greets King Seti I in a scene that originally embellished his Theban tomb around 1290 BC. See what happens? I get so captivated with reading to you that I let my coffee get cold. That's okay. You're worth it. Each and every one of you. Cold coffee, not a problem. Happy chickens being read mythology tales, that's all that matters. The divinity of the pharaoh. From the beginning of pharaonic times, Egypt's kings were revered not only as royal, but divine. Their godhood served as a link between the land, the people, and the deities who ruled the universe. In the hierarchy of Egyptian religion, only the king was permitted to make offerings to the gods. There could be no other mediator between earth and heaven. Although such work might well be delegated to the high priest, it was understood that a priest only deputized for the king, having, in theory, no authority of his own. Each pharaoh was a god from birth, while the king's mother was recognized by all as human mother. The idea that he had been sired by Amun-Ra incarnate as his royal father was widely accepted. When the pharaoh had his own son, the same principle of divine incarnation would ensure that godhood was passed down through the dynasty. The coronation rituals further reinforced this concept. And at death, the king became wholly divine, no longer taking the living from a woman of Horus as ruler. He became one with Osiris in the underworld, while at the same time joining his father Ra in his ascendancy over all things. All this was the most natural of arrangements. And a matter of simple, if wonderful fact, no doubt the irresistible fact, God is our king, the king is a god. The pharaoh's divinity, almost like a written constitution, established the Egyptian state as an entity sanctioned by the law of humankind and the gods. This statuette of Seth is depicted in this basalt carving with his sister and wife, Nephthys, see, I told you, at his side. For most of Egyptian history, Seth was Lord of Chaos, a god to be carefully placated. Seth, Lord of Disorder. In very early times, Seth was worshipped at his cult center, Makeda, and because he was associated with the frightening desert sandstorms of the region, it was important to appease him. He ultimately became a lord of misrule and chaos, the god of storms. the enemy of Horus and the organized world that Horus stood for. Indeed, that enmity was part of the Egyptian order, a darkness against which the divine light could flourish, which you're basking in currently. Like most Egyptian gods, Seth was often pictured with the head of an animal, usually the strange Seth beast, an imaginary creature with a vague resemblance to an anteater. Sometimes he was depicted as one of the animals considered to be unclean by the Egyptians, such as the hippopotamus or the pig. For all his villainy, Seth's antecedents were impeccable. As the son of the sky goddess Nut, he matched in divine status his brother Osiris and his sisters Isis and Nephthys. The latter was also one of his wives. Indeed, his strength and rank among the gods gained him Ra's support during much of his bitter struggle with Horus. After his defeat on earth, he journeyed with the sun god during the hours of the night, defending him against the serpent Apophis. Seth's immense strength and forceful sexuality guaranteed him the veneration of at least a minority of mortals. Although rarely a popular god, he did have his good points. An appeal to Seth, the Lord of Chaos, might help keep bad weather away. Indeed, at one point in Egypt's history, he enjoyed a period of general worship and respect during the 19th and 20th dynasties, around 1292 to 1075 BC. But Seth was always a dangerous god to venerate. The dynasties that followed characterized him as the god of harm, and late in Egyptian history, he had generally come to be regarded as the personification of evil doing. An intimate encounter. Seth's hatred did not diminish, and Horus soon found himself contending once again with the older god's superior strength and immense capacity for dirty tricks. Against these qualities, Horus had only two genuine weapons: a burning sense that justice was on his side, and a mother whose cunning and command of magic proved to be enough to tip the balance. Isis's help was especially useful on an occasion when Seth subjected his nephew to an outright inappropriate attack. In ancient Egypt, semen was thought to flow through all the veins of the body and was considered both potent and dangerous. So much so that the word for semen was similar to the word for poison. A god's semen was considered to be particularly powerful. After decades of fighting between Horus and Seth, the other gods were growing increasingly weary of the destructive rivalry, and there came a time when Ra flatly ordered it to end. Be at peace together and cease your quarreling. Making a show of accepting the edict, Seth attempted to befriend Horus and invited him to his home. In due course, night fell. A bed was prepared, and the two gods settled down together. When Seth thought that Horus was asleep, he attacked him to show his dominance over his younger rival. But Horus was ready and caught Seth's seed with his hand, and at once he ran to Isis, crying, "Look what Seth has done to me!" Isis, who understood the dangers from Seth's semen, at once cut off her son's hand and threw it into the Nile. Of course, she quickly replaced it with another. Then she prepared a counterattack. She took some of Horus's own semen and took it to Seth's garden, where she sprinkled it over the lettuces, the god's favorite vegetable. Sure enough, the next morning, Seth came to his garden to pick and eat the lettuces, and in the extraordinary way of gods, he became pregnant with the seed of Horus. The next time the two rivals appeared before the council of gods, Seth began to boast once more of his might and skill. He seemed to be making a powerful impression until Horus asked the gods to call out to his seed and that of his uncle. In response, Thoth laid hands on Horus and summoned the seed of Seth, but it answered only from the river. However, When in turn he shut Seth and called for the seed of Horus, it answered from within the god. Thoth then summoned the seed to Seth's forehead where it appeared to Seth's great rage as a golden sun. This proved the dominance of Horus over his uncle. The final battle. Already the struggle between the two had lasted many decades, according to the god's particular reckoning of time. But Seth demanded one last challenge. "Let us each build a ship of stone," he said, "and race each other down the Nile. The winner will have the crown of Osiris." Horus built his ship first, out of stout pine. But then he plastered it over to make it look as if it had been made of stone. When Seth saw it, he used a mighty club to knock off a whole mountain top, from which he built a much larger ship of solid stone for himself. Of course, when the two boats were launched, Seth's vessel immediately sank to the bottom. But Horus had little time to laugh. Seth at once changed himself into a hippopotamus, charged at Horus's ship, and dashed it to pieces. Undaunted by this, Horus prepared to harpoon the hippopotamus Seth, but the other gods intervened to stop him. Thus another battle was over, leaving everything still unresolved. Despairing of a solution, Horus went to see Night, the revered goddess of wisdom, in her delta city of Sais. "Please," he begged her, "let the judgment be made. For 80 years Seth and I have stood before the tribunal of the gods, and we are no nearer a decision. I have won the day 1,000 times, yet Seth refuses to give in, and never pays the slightest attention to what the gods say to him." When the other gods heard Horus's plea to Night, they agreed that he was justified. Besides, their own patience in dealing with the dispute was now completely exhausted. Just like you. You're like, "I'm chilling in the sun, don't mock me." At last, Thoth suggested to Ra that he apply for advice to Osiris himself in the beautiful West, his kingdom of the underworld, and, accordingly, a messenger was dispatched to the realm of Osiris. After a long and perilous journey into the realm of the dead, the messenger returned to Osiris's reply. Not surprisingly, the god supported his son, Horus, but he was also greatly angered that justice had not already been done for the boy. Why, asked Osiris, should Horus be cheated? Ra was irked at being addressed in such a manner, and sent the messenger on his journey westwards again with a haughty answer. This time, Osiris's rage knew no bounds. "Here in my kingdom of the dead," he wrote, "there are many powerful demons. Should I send them into the land of living, to return here with the stolen hearts of evildoers? For I am much stronger than you. Sooner or later, even the gods must come to sleep in my beautiful West." Osiris's threat resolved the matter. In solemn conclave, the gods agreed that Horus should inherit the lordship of the earth. Ra ordered Isis to bring Seth in chains before him, which she willingly did. Seth asked Ra, "Do you still claim the throne of Osiris?" By this time Seth was ready to concede. "No, great one. Let Horus be summoned and given his father's throne." The long dispute was finally over. The young Horus was given the crown of Egypt, and all the earth rejoiced. As for Seth, Ra had something to offer by way of recompense. "You may join me in the skies as my son and god of storms," he told the loser. "Your thunder and lightning will terrify people for eternity." Since you're all congregated over there, the earthly power of the pharaoh. Harold, you're so loud. Such bright red. You're so bright red with your comb there. Here's a statuette of Senhorseth III, who ruled from about 1836 BC to 1818 BC. Was one of Egypt's most effective kings, radically reforming his administration and showing how authority could be successfully delegated. Other kings were less fortunate. Despite the trappings of divinity, a number of pharaohs fell victim to political elements beyond their control. Since the pharaoh was a god, it followed that he had absolute power on earth. However, despite the trappings of divinity, ordinary human politics ensured that there were sometimes plots against his power. Assassinations and usurpations were rarely mentioned. Such chaotic possibilities were too dangerous to contemplate, but treachery was by no means unheard of. One famous document, the instructions of King Amenemhet, purporting to be the last testimony of the king, set out a bleak and Machiavellian view of Egyptian power politics. Beware of subjects who are nobodies, of whose plotting one is not aware. Trust not a brother, no, not a friend. Make no intimates, it is worthless. When you lie down, guard your heart yourself, for no man has adherents on the day of woe. I gave to the beggar, I raised the orphan. I gave success to the poor and to the wealthy. But he who ate my food raised opposition. He to whom I gave my trust used it to plot. Apart from the ever-present risk of treason, Egypt at the height of its civilization was simply too large and complex for one man to exercise sole power. There was the priesthood to be taken into account for a start. When Akhenaten attempted to greatly extend the revival of the ancient cult of the sun god, and hence to remove the powerful influence of the Amun clergy at Karnak over the monarchy, he ran into resistance from the traditional religious authorities. Indeed, they eradicated his reforms immediately after his death. Then there were provincial governors, nomarchs, who, with other senior officials and administrators, always sought to keep as much power in their own hands as possible. And of course, the military commanders, all of whom were capable of acting in their own interests before those of the king. As a dispatch from an unruly general put it, in the time of Ramses the 11th, or Rameses the 11th, Pharaoh, whose master is he these days? Pretty scathing. Harold, you all see this relief of Isis? Isis, mother of Horus, used all her skills to ensure her son's victory over Seth. This relief depicting Isis is from the tomb equipment of Yuya and Thuya, the great-grandparents of Tutankhamun, around 1380 BC. Highly decorative chests were valued items of Egyptian furniture. This ornate example belonged to the Lady Meret and was found in the tomb that she shared with her husband Ka around 1400 BC. The chest and the tree. By Greco-Roman times, one at least of Egypt's goddesses had acquired a greatly expanded repertoire. Isis, mother, healer, and arch-magician, appealed enormously to peoples all around the Mediterranean and beyond. Naturally, from this worship there grew a great demand for new tales of the goddess. Plutarch, the Greek historian and biographer who lived from 46 to 120 AD, was one of many writers glad to oblige.
From Egyptian sources, which he mixed with a little Greek legend and no doubt a few ideas of his own, he came up with a colorful account of the trickery Seth used to murder Osiris. In Plutarch's version, Seth ordered the making of an exquisitely crafted chest to the exact height and width of his great brother. Then he threw a great banquet for Osiris, at which he displayed the chest to the admiration of all. It should belong, said Seth, to whomsoever it might fit. And one by one, the guests tried the chest for size, but none matched its measurements except Osiris himself. And the moment the unsuspecting king lay in the chest, Seth and his fellow plotters promptly nailed the lid shut, sealed it with molten lead, and cast the chest upon the waters of the Nile Delta. Isis at once set off to find her husband's body. But by the time she learned where Seth had put the great chest, it had floated far out to sea. It finally came to land at Byblos in the Lebanon. There the washed-up chest gave root to a sapling, which magically grew into a vast tree, big enough to enclose Osiris and his coffin within its trunk. Oh yeah, by the way, in case you didn't know, Byblos in Lebanon is where they get the name for the Bible. Oh, you already knew that. Alright, good. There the washed-up chest gave root to a sapling which magically grew into a vast tree big enough to enclose Osiris and his coffin within its trunk. Impressed by the size of the tree, the king of Lebanon had it cut down and used as a pillar for his new palace, with Osiris still within. In time, of course, Isis tracked the coffin down, and to the astonishment of the king and his court, cut open the great roof pillar and removed her husband's body. The tree, Plutarch adds, lending credibility to his tale, was preserved for many years in Byblos and worshipped there. Well, it's not ice cold coffee now, but it was pretty close. But it's okay. You're all gathered around. You're fascinated by this Egyptology. Well, all except your sister who's laying an egg. But that's because nature calls and nature takes the priority. Which all of this is all about. This is all about people trying to make sense of the world in which they live. The divine order. Taken as a whole, this myth was and is a powerful evocation of the tension and conflict between, on the one hand, the forces of order, as exemplified by Osiris and Horus, and on the other hand, their dark counterparts, the chaos and confusion represented by Seth. There were times in Egypt's long history when Seth won a temporary victory, but it was in the interest of all people for the sake of peace and prosperity to support the successors of Horus. And the successors of Horus, of course, were the pharaohs. So it was that the human king of Egypt took the name of Horus, given to him on his accession, and added to his own, which not only set him clearly among the gods, but also announced him to be the earthly representative of the forces of divine order. The Horus-Set myth reflects issues of kingship that were rarely discussed openly in Egypt. Young Horus is portrayed as a vulnerable candidate vying for the position of supreme ruler, who in the end is victorious over his uncle Seth, who represents chaos. Although successful usurpations were rare, Egypt needed a central myth to discourage what it most feared, the violent transfer of power. The triumph of Horus was regularly enacted as a ritual drama in temple ceremonials so that Egypt remained united. The white crown, Upper Egypt, is the eye of Horus. The red crown, Delta, is the eye of Horus. In a pallid relief dating from about 3000 BC, King Narmer prepares to strike a prisoner with the royal mace. A pharaoh was generally far too august for such coarse, hand-to-hand violence. The image is symbolic of the triumph of order over chaos and of Egypt over her foes. The birth of Hatshepsut. Following the death of Queen Hatshepsut, who assumed the masculine regalia of kingship, her stepson and successor Thutmose III either defaced or usurped her images in a gesture of supremacy. This relief may represent Hatshepsut or Thutmose. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Thutmose I and wife to Thutmose II, at whose death the throne passed to Hatshepsut's young stepson, the future Thutmose III. But Hatshepsut assumed full powers of regency, and after 2 years she had herself crowned king, not queen, in her own right. This audacious move required an appropriate genealogy from the gods to make it acceptable. According to an inscription in Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri, Amun-Ra, having gathered the lesser gods around his throne, told them, "I will create a queen to rule over Egypt." Accompanied by the messenger god Thoth, Amun-Ra went to the palace of King Thutmose I, and taking on the appearance of the pharaoh, appeared at the bed of his wife, Ahmose. Naturally, she rejoiced at his virility, and as the palace became inundated with the scent of God, he had his way with her. According to one version, the god explained to Ahmose, "Truly, Hatshepsut will be the name of the child I have placed in you, for this was what you exclaimed." The word translates approximately as the noble best. Thus the future she-king was named by her mother's cry of passion in the arms of Amun-Ra. Certainly, Hatshepsut was favored by the gods during her 15-year rule, but later dynasties tried to remove her name and image as her rule was considered contrary to Ma'at, natural order. And yet more than 3,000 years after her death, she was still renowned as one of the greatest pharaohs. The kings in myth. Ra has placed the king on earth of the living forever and eternity to judge humanity and to pacify the gods and to realize right and to annihilate wrong. He gives divine offerings to the gods, funerary offerings to the transfigured dead. The name of the king is in the sky like that of Ra. He lives in elation like Ra Horefti. This new kingdom inscription from Thebes makes it clear how the king was thought to be at one with the gods. Myth, for the Egyptians, was not an account of events in a distant past or in a place far removed from earth. Kings took their place in the mythic world as soon as they assumed the throne. One consequence of according divine status to the king was that each king became the central character in his own mythology. Godhood itself was the core of the myth. A divine birth was assumed automatically with accession to the throne, and throughout his reign a king's divinity would regularly be celebrated, culminating in the funerary cult he could expect to be established after his death. Although the king's own mythology would be woven from the actual happenings of a specific reign, It is difficult to tease out hard historical evidence from the accounts in which kings and their courtiers cocooned real events, invariably written in an exaggerated and flamboyant style to glorify the pharaoh. As one scribe said, perhaps as long as 2000 BC. Is it that good news, Harold? You got good news? Let's take a listen to what Harold's good news is all about. She's so excited. What do you think? Do you think Harold loves her job as the poop flyer? So let's return to what the scribe wrote in 2000 BC. The king, lord of courtiers, cannot be foolish. At his coming forth from the womb he was wise, and God has distinguished him before 1,000,000 other men. Thus no king of Egypt could take part in a military campaign that was anything but victorious. One of the most common royal scenes was the smiting scene, in which the king, in a ritual pose that was scarcely altered by Egyptian artists over a period of 3,000 years, holds a weapon over the head of his defeated enemy. Stylized drawings of hordes of captives, usually carefully enumerated in their thousands, and piles of corpses are generally part of the standard display. Sometimes such victory monuments were to all intents and purposes fantasies, although more often they were idealized versions of something that had actually occurred. An interesting example in the mortuary temple reliefs of Ramesses III at Nebunet Habu depicts a battle around 1186 BC against the Pelasets, one of the groups of sea peoples whose aggressive migrations from the Aegean area disturbed the peace of the Mediterranean in the late 2nd millennium BC. According to Ramesses' official history, the battle was a very one-sided affair, fought on both sea and land. The migrants' troops were trapped like birds in a net, and in some temples there are fine carved reliefs showing them meeting their just deserts at the hands of the mighty pharaoh. Afterwards, says the chronicle succinctly, the Pelasets were made ashes. However, other documents from Ramesses' reign indicate that later invaders were granted royal permission to settle on the same land where they had fought, which happened to be one of the most fertile pieces of land in the region. Such indications that the enemy did not perhaps come off so badly after all had no place in royal myth, also known in common language as propaganda. A specific discrepancy between the official version of events and reality is found in the reign of Ramesses II, a century earlier. Ramesses II the Great spent many years struggling against the Hittite kingdom in Anatolia and northern Syria. The Anatolia is present-day Turkey. Yeah, gives you an idea. They had to travel all that distance from Egypt to Asia Minor, Turkey. At a time when Egypt controlled most of Palestine and the southern Lebanon, between the two powers was a kind of political buffer zone. In about 1275 BC, Ramesses led a powerful expedition north of Gaza all the way to the Hittite city of Kadesh on the Orontes River. The advance guard of the Egyptian army, led by the king, had barely begun to make camp by Kadesh when the approaching support division was ambushed by a large force under the Hittite king Muwatallis. At least one Egyptian division was scattered. Ramesses, commanding from the camp, managed to hold off the main Hittite attack long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The battle ended in some sort of stalemate, and a few days later the Egyptian host, or what was left of it, marched home again, leaving Kadesh unscathed. From the Egyptian point of view, the battle was clearly a shambles, from which they were lucky to escape without suffering total disaster. For Ramesses, though, it was a great victory, and he made sure that all Egypt knew of it. The battle is lavishly described on the walls of 5 of his temple buildings at Abydos, Luxor, Karnak, Abu Simbel, and the Ramesseum. And it was told and retold on endless papyri as an exercise for schoolboys and trainee scribes. In this official version, Ramesses is surrounded by 2,500 Hittite chariots. Yet, with the aid of Amun, forward I am with you. I, your father, my hand is with you. I prevail over 100,000 men. The Pharaoh seized the enemy off almost single-handed. After his mighty victory, the Hittites begged for peace. Look, you spent yesterday killing 100,000, and today you came back and left us no heirs. Be not hard in your dealings, victorious king. Peace is better than fighting. Give us breath. Ramesses, marching briskly back to Egypt, is naturally prepared to be magnanimous. A few years later, the Hittites were plagued by internal revolt and threatened from the east by Assyria. That's Mesopotamia, Babylon. But the region was simply too far away for Egypt's domination to be long-lasting. In the end, with both sides weary of the constant destructive skirmishing, a peace treaty was signed between Ramesses II and the newly enthroned king of the Hittites, Hattusilus III. This agreement, which survived in both Egyptian and Hittite versions, each claiming that the first humiliating request for peace came from the other, is the oldest existing example of a peaceful international accord. A copy is kept in the United Nations building in New York. The treaty seems to have been successful, since there were no further Hittite wars during the remainder of Ramesses' 66-year reign. As part of the settlement, in the 33rd year of his reign, the pharaoh married a daughter of the Hittite king, and to consolidate matters still further, he married a second daughter 11 years later. Events celebrated in temple and the stele inscriptions. This image of Thutmose III radiates a tranquility that belies his record as one of Egypt's most formidable military leaders. The Syrians took many years to recover from his campaigns. Ramesses II the Great, shown with the creator god Amun. Ramesses, on the left, wears the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. But there is little to distinguish the two figures. Ramesses was himself a god, after all. So Upper and Lower Egypt, one had a eagle, and the other had a serpent. And they took those two symbols and combined them in their royal headdress. Prince Thutmose, overseeing workers who were clearing drifts of sand covering the body of the great Sphinx of Giza. Now, as a corollary, Robert Schoch, a contemporary geologist, originally disputed the age, or rather, agreed with the consensus of the age of the Sphinx as being only 3,000 years old or something to that effect. And he was invited to go look at it, and after inspecting it physically and seeing the different weatherization patterns, has concluded that the Sphinx is closer to 10,000 years old, putting it on par with Göbekli Tepe at its age of 12,000 years, which means after the Ice Age, almost immediately after the Ice Age, which makes you wonder, was it built immediately after the Ice Age, or was it built during or prior to? The dream at Thutmose. Between the paws of the great Sphinx at Giza, one of the most powerful of all the monuments of Egypt, there lies a granite stele inscribed with a strange story, an account of certain curious events during the reign of King Amenhotep II, around 1426 to 1400 BC. It so happened, recounts the stele, that a young prince of the royal house was hunting in the desert near Giza. His name was Thutmose, and as one of the king's young sons, he had no hopes of the succession, or so he believed. That day the sun burned particularly fiercely, and by noon the prince was very weary. Finding himself close to the great Sphinx, of which only the head still showed above the wind-blown desert sands, he sought out a cool spot in its ancient shade and promptly fell asleep. Immediately there came upon him an extraordinary dream in which the Sphinx itself came to life and spoke to him, saying, "I am the sun god and your father. Listen and hear how you shall be the ruler of all Egypt. There was one condition. Thutmose must clear away the desert sands that were engulfing the Sphinx." When he awoke, he hurried at once to Memphis to organize a team of workmen to shift the sand from the lion body. The Sphinx remained true to its word, and Thutmose was chosen as king above his elder brothers. In due course, he was crowned as Thutmose IV. His reign lasted for 10 years, and throughout that time, he honored the Sphinx. King Senworset I is embraced by Ptah, creator god of Memphis. Senworset's father was apparently assassinated. The tale of the father's servant, Sinue, tells how he fled Egypt to escape suspicion of the murder in this relief right here. Hieroglyphic relief. Sinue, one of Egypt's most loved stories. It exists in many versions, celebrates the values that the pharaoh's subjects held dear. It tells the story of Sinue, a high court official of the 12th dynasty. Sinue was a trusted servant at the court of King Amenemhet. When his master died, it is thought by assassination, he was convinced that, regardless of his innocence, he might be implicated and punished by the king's successor. So he fled through the Sinai desert and sought refuge in Syria. There he thrived mightily. The local prince showed him great favor, even granting him his eldest daughter in marriage. Over the years, he grew in wealth and stature, but all this was meaningless to Sinue, for there could be no real happiness for him outside of his own country. At last, Senworset I, who was now king, hearing of Sinue's unhappiness, sent a message to the former servant, "You shall not die abroad. Think of your dead body. Come home." At once Sinye gave all his goods to his eldest son and set off for Egypt. At last he met the king. "My limbs tremble," he said, "when this god addressed me." But Senwosret the first was inclined to be generous. He made him a companion among the nobles and ordered that he should be bathed, anointed, and dressed as an Egyptian once more. Moreover, there was even better to come, for the king not only granted him land and a house, but, far more important to the Egyptians, he gave him a proper tomb. Wow. Such honors befitting a member of the court, a servant of the court. I'm just skipping ahead to see how far we've got left. Ah, good. 18 pages until we get to the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Sumerians. With Easter approaching, I wanted to coincide that reading with Easter. A cunning general, even on those rare occasions when neither the pharaoh nor one of the other gods was the chief protagonist, every tale naturally redounded to the king's great credit. One of the more entertaining tales concerned the ruse de guerre used by Deshudi, a general of Thutmose III, to capture the city of Joppa, present-day Jaffa, in Canaan. One account of this rebellion, written many years later, was to a large extent fictional. A revolt had taken place in Joppa, and not for the first time. During the course of his reign, Thutmose fought numerous campaigns in the area. Clearly, it was imperative to bring the city to heel at once. Thutmose, unable to leave Egypt, sent instead his resourceful general Deshudi, entrusting him with the royal mace as a sign of the powers that had been delegated to him. When Deshudi reached Joppa, he was daunted by the city's towering walls. Reluctantly, he ordered an all-out assault, which resulted in heavy Egyptian losses, with nothing to show for them. So Deshudi decided to try cunning against his opponents. He sent a formal letter to the prince, once more, demanding surrender. Attached to the official scroll, however, he added a private message. It was clear that he could not take the city, wrote the general, and he was much afraid of the consequent wrath of Thutmose. Therefore, for a handsome bribe, he would change sides. Perhaps the prince would agree to meet to discuss terms with him. Oh, what do you suppose is going to happen? The prince, who ought to have known better, was willing to compromise. Under a flag of truce, the two men discussed matters amicably. Yeah, so if you've ever watched Star Wars, Clone Wars, this is a ruse Obi-Wan used on Chrysalis, I suspect. Then the prince asked if he could see the famous mace. In the privacy of Deshudi's tent, the general produced the great symbol of authority, but the prince did not have long to marvel at the mace before Deshudi knocked him unconscious, using the exquisite treasure as a weapon. Alright, so Obi-Wan didn't do that, but he still took the separatist general prisoner. Mainly because it's a children's animated, but it's the same concept. You see how myths repeat even in common or modern times? While some of his men bound the luckless ruler, Djudi told the prince's servants that he had prepared many gifts for Joppa to display where his new loyalties lay. The gifts were impressive and numerous. They filled 200 large baskets, each carried by 2 unarmed men. The people of Joppa opened their gates to allow the tribute to enter. This parallels another mythological tale of Odysseus and the Trojan horse. Once inside, however, the trap was sprung. From each basket leaped an Egyptian soldier carrying extra weapons on behalf of his 2 bearers. Within minutes, the Egyptian force had seized the gates, and the rest of Djudi's men flooded through to victory. Much in the same way that the Homeric epic of the Trojan War, the Iliad, talks about the fall of Troy. In due course, the city's booty and its fettered prince were brought to Egypt, and the king's ingenious general was heaped with rewards. So that mythology from Egypt was repeated by the Greeks and then repeated by Dave Filoni, or whoever wrote that episode. Alright. It appears one of you is still nesting in there, laying eggs. And one of you is looking to defy gravity. Girls are so wonderful. So this hieroglyph image, 2 mummies at the end of the 70-day mummification process, from a fragment of a painted wall scene from the 18th dynasty Theban tomb of Mare-Maat, priest of Maat, around 1391 to 1353 BC. The reign of Amenhotep III. The body had to be preserved in the best form possible, in readiness for the pleasures of the hereafter. The jackal-headed god Anubis attends to a dead person in his role as an embalmer. This 19th dynasty royal painting is from the tomb of the workman Sened Jem at Deir el Medina in Thebes. Hello, Roadrunner. Do you want up here? You can do it. Come on. Come on. You jump further. Anubis, god of mummification. You're not going to do it. Alright, that's fine. Anubis was the protective deity of cemeteries, credited with the invention of embalming because he helped Isis to preserve her brother Osiris, whose body was the first to be mummified. Usually depicted as a reclining black jackal or a man with a jackal head, he was thought to ward off scavengers. Osiris's blackness symbolized the rich soil of Egypt and the appearance of a mummified corpse. Mummification was a complex procedure which involved a series of detailed operations and rituals. To begin with, the body was washed and purified. Then the perishable organs were removed. First, the brain was extracted through the nasal passage using a long metal hook, and then the left side of the body was opened up to remove the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. The brains were discarded as worthless, but the heart, which was seen as the seat of all thought, was left in place. The removed organs were then washed and dried separately with natron, a type of sodium salt, treated with aromatic oils and resins, wrapped in linen, and then placed into the 4 canopic jars, so called because of a long-standing misconception that they were related to human-headed jars that were worshipped as manifestations of Osiris in the Delta port of Canopus. Each jar was then entrusted to the care of one of Horus's 4 sons, who were believed to be present at the soul's final judgment before Osiris. The liver was protected by the human-headed Imseti, the lungs by the baboon-headed Hapi, the stomach by the jackal-headed Duwamatep, and the intestines by the hawk-headed Webi Senuep. Each creature featured on the stoppers of the jars. After evisceration, the body cavity was washed out and scented, then stuffed with temporary packing, which included natron to help dry the body's interior. Natron was also placed over the corpse for 40 days. During this stage of the process, the body lost up to 75% of its weight. The temporary stuffing would eventually be removed and the body cavity refilled with fresh natron and resin-soaked linen to restore its former shape, after which cosmetic decorations were made. After being coated in cedar oil and scented resins, the body was wrapped in bandages while priests read out the appropriate incantations from the Book of the Dead. Oh wow. The head of an anonymous mummy. Many mummified bodies have been found in a remarkable state of preservation some thousands of years after. Amulets were often distributed among the bandages of a mummy to protect it during its voyage through the underworld. This glazed scarab amulet, around 1295 BC, depicts the sun god in his morning form as Khepri, flanked by the sisters Isis and Nephthys. Preparing for eternity. And ancient Egyptians believed that preserving the corpse was crucial to its attaining the afterlife. Initially, bodies buried in shallow pits were protected by the desiccating effect of the desert. Later, the process of mummification served the same function in the tomb. In addition to the physical body, Sa, and its heart, Ib, regarded as the seat of intelligence and emotion, the Egyptians believed that each individual was made up of 5 distinctive parts: the Ka, life force or soul; the Ba, personality or spirit; the Ak, immortal unification of the Ka and Ba; the Ren, the name; and the Shu, shadow. Both the name and the shadow had metaphysical qualities thought to protect the individual. This 5-fold division had particular significance after death, during the hazardous journey through the underworld. When the greater god Khnum molded every person from clay at birth, he created a spiritual replica called the Ka. After death, the Ka was free to dwell in the tomb, absorbing the life-giving properties of the offering, known as Ka, left by priests and the family. The Ba, similar to our concept of the personality, was usually shown as a human-headed bird that dwelled in the tomb at night. Its distinctive physical qualities differentiated one individual from another. The ba could also represent a god's power on earth. The Mephite Apis bull, for example, was the ba of Osiris. Unlike the ka, the ba was able to visit the living world or travel through the heavens with the gods. Its role in guaranteeing the deceased's immortality was crucial. It had to travel through the underworld, overcoming a series of trials before it could be reunited with the ka and become an Ak. The Ak, symbolized by crested ibis, represented the final and most complete form of existence to which every Egyptian aspired, and once formed, would last for eternity. In some funerary texts, it is written that the Ak dwelled in the heavens with the gods. But the formation of the Ak, which resulted from the unification of the Ka and Ba, depended on the successful physical preparation of the corpse for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that life after death could be enjoyed only if three conditions were met. The dead body had to be preserved in pristine condition. The Ka had to be supplied with sustenance, and the deceased's name had to be commemorated by prayer. Mummification. The first step towards meeting these conditions was to initiate a process now known as mummification, designed to preserve the corpse. This involved evisceration, removal of the internal organs, followed by dehydration of the body with natron, a form of sodium that absorbed water. The corpse was then anointed with aromatic oils and resin before being wrapped in strips of linen. The oldest intact mummy found in situ was discovered in the Saqqara tomb of a court singer, Nefer, who died around 2470 BC. He was expertly wrapped and preserved, with details such as eyebrows and a mustache painted onto his bandaged face. As the embalmers acquired experience, certain techniques gained prestige, and the experts codified their practices in manuals that described each step of the work. The oldest such manuals date from the 1st century AD, but they are undoubtedly based on earlier texts. Initially, mummification was reserved for royalty, but gradually embalming became available to all who could afford it. By the time of Herodotus in the 5th century BC, it had become a relatively common phenomenon. The Greek historian described a scene in an embalming parlor. When a corpse is carried into the embalmers, they show the bearers wooden models of mummies, painted in exact imitation of the real thing. The best method of embalming, so they say, is that which practiced on the god Osiris. The second method that they demonstrate is rather inferior and costs less. The third is cheapest of all. Having indicated the differences, they ask by which method the corpse is to be prepared. And when the bearers have agreed a price and departed, the embalmers left behind in the workshop set to work. Despite such commercialism, embalming continued to hold mystic significance. Regardless of cost, the minimum length of time required to complete a mummification was 70 days. This period was not determined by practicalities. Experiments have shown that the procedure had no benefit beyond 40 days. There is biblical evidence in Genesis that Jacob was embalmed, probably because his son Joseph was a high official at the Egyptian court, and because Jacob's body had to be returned to Canaan for burial. 40 days were fulfilled for him, for so are fulfilled the days of of those which are in balm. And the Egyptians mourned for him the 70 days. The Egyptians clearly mourned until the 70-day period was complete. The length of time necessary to mummify the corpse may have been dictated by the period when the rising dog star, Sirius, was temporarily hidden by its proximity to the sun. Sirius was of particular importance because its appearance heralded the annual flood. The Ripper Out. The most elaborate embalming rituals, the body was subject to complicated procedures. For example, although it was possible to remove some internal organs via bodily orifices without making an incision, it was easier to open up the abdominal cavity. This operation was performed with a flint blade by the Ripper Out, or slitter, as the Greeks graphically called the practitioner. According to Greek sources, he was then ritually chased from the corpse, an act that possibly alluded to the role of Seth in the Osiris myth. Protecting the dead. The Egyptians' meticulous treatment of the body after death corresponded to their concern for the spirit, which also required a great deal of preparation before embarking on its journey through the underworld. During this voyage, the Ba was expected to encounter a variety of hazards, and so the living equipped the dead with many magical devices, such as protective amulets, which were placed in the bandages surrounding the corpse. One of particular importance was the so-called Djed pillar, an upright column topped by 4 crossbars. Its origin remains uncertain, but the Book of the Dead refers to it as the backbone of Osiris, and it was intended to give the corpse stability in the afterlife. At various sites in Egypt, the ceremony of the raising of the Djed pillar was performed during royal jubilee festivals and during rituals for the dead king. There were other types of amulet, including the heart scarab, which alludes to the heart's role as the seat of all intelligence and the center of personality. As such, the heart would be weighed during the judgment before Osiris, and if it was found to be heavy with sin, the deceased would be condemned. To prevent the heart from confessing its sin, the heart scarab was placed over the chest among the mummy wrappings and inscribed with chapter 30 of the Book of the Dead. O my heart, which I had from my mother, O my heart, which I had upon earth, do not rise up against me as a witness in the presence of the Lord of things. Additional amulets could be shaped as miniature gods and goddesses or parts of the body. The former were protective, while the latter acted as substitutes if, by misfortune, the embalming process should fail. Thus arrayed and wrapped within its outer shroud, the body was ready for the coffin.